Welcome to Tatev Talks, where brains meets banter, with your host, the future Dr. Sarkissyan. This week, we're talking about Grad School 101, so stay tuned for our first episode. Hey everyone, welcome to our first ever episode of Tatev Talks. This podcast is going to be about grad school, it's going to be about psychology, it's going to be about research and education in general. My name is Tatev Sarkissyan, so I'll be your host for this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am a perpetual student. I love education. I cannot get enough of it. I'm always in school. I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Cal State LA in psychology. I went directly into my master's program again at Cal State LA, again in psychology. And then I took a gap year, and now I'm getting my PhD in special education in a joint doctoral program from Cal State LA and UCLA. So, as you can tell, I literally love school so much that I thought I would just share all the things that I've learned so far in my process. I'm also currently a teacher at Cal State LA. I love teaching. That's my purpose and that's my why. And you'll know why that's important in a little bit. I am currently doing research as well. My current project is focusing on the educational experiences of formerly incarcerated individuals in a program called Project Rebound. I'm going to talk to you all about that in a future episode, and I would love for you to tune in for that one as well. In this time that I've spent in being a student, which is literally my entire life, I have learned a couple of things. And one of the most important and influential things that led to this podcast happening was that we don't talk enough about the hidden curriculum and things that students don't know. I'm going to share with you all the things that I do know, and I'm going to give you a disclaimer. I don't know what I don't know, but I do know a lot, and I went through a lot of trial and error, so I'm able to kind of tell you where I went right and where I went wrong. And hopefully you can gain something, at least one new piece of information from every week's episode. This week, we're talking about grad school, the 101, the basic, the why, the how to get there, what to do, all of that. And in future episodes, we'll talk about what the experience of grad school is like and, how you deal with imposter syndrome and things like that. So it's going to be really fun. And thank you for joining us on our first episode. So let's get right into it. First, we're going to get into your why, and then we'll talk about how, and then we're going to answer some questions that my students have asked me in prior years of teaching. So let's go. What is your why? When you're thinking about graduate school, it's important to try to understand what graduate school is going to do for you. Every single person is different, and every single person's reason for going to graduate school is very different. So some people think about graduate school like a title and prestige and wanting to be called a certain thing. That's cool, but if that's your reason, then we have to think about like why you're really going into it, right? You want to think about what grad school is going to do for you. What is that degree going to do for you sans the title and the prestige? And here I kind of mean, what career are you looking at? While grad school is a long period of time, could be anywhere from 5 to 7, maybe 9 years for some people, it's more just a portion of your life, and you have to think about what career you're going to take after graduate school. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? If you really want to go into academics and research and teaching and things like that, then maybe a PhD program is totally right for you. But if you hate research and you hate academics and you just really don't want to teach, then maybe graduate school is not for you. So thinking about your why is extremely important in your first step to going to graduate school. It's also thinking about your career, your choices, what you can do with that degree that's going to matter to you. How can that school and that degree benefit you? And I want you to be really selfish here. How can you be benefited by the program that you're going to go into? What is your purpose? What do you see yourself doing 10, 15 years down the line? And I know that was a cliche question that your fifth grade teacher would ask you after your summer break or when you were about to graduate, but this is when it's really important. What do you want to do? What is your purpose? What is your why? What is going to benefit you? What is going to make you happy? What is going to fulfill every single thing you've ever thought about? When you go to sleep at night, what do you dream of yourself doing? When you answer that question and you really figure it out, and I will suggest to you here to journal. No, this is not just for the women. Men can journal too. Everyone can journal, and figure out what your purpose is. Meditate. I don't know. Do some like physical activity that you love that brings you joy. Go hiking. Do some yoga. Go to the gym and think about what your purpose is and what your why is. In those times that you're the happiest, engaging in something very like calming and good for your body, think about what's good for your mind. What is your why? When you figure that out, then you can get into the how. So let's get into it. Let's get into the super nitty gritty of how to apply to graduate school. The first thing that I'll tell any of my students and anyone that's ever asked me about how do I get started, which oftentimes is the question that students have because they don't really know what to do. They don't really know how to get started. So they'll come to me and they'll be like, what do I do? Like, I know I have to go to grad school, but like, what do I do? Which grad school? How do I do it? I really like to tell them that the first thing that they should focus on is location. If you are someone that loves your family and when you go on a 3-day trip, you miss them and you cannot be without them, then applying to a school in Kentucky might be super out of the question for you. Spending 5 years away from them or 7 years away from them in Kentucky is probably not going to be good for your mind, body, and soul. So maybe don't apply to the school in Kentucky. You're going to be paying for that application and you're going to not be happy doing it. So it's probably not the best bet for you. On the other side, if you cannot stand your family and you really, really, really want to be away from them, then maybe applying to Kentucky is the right choice for you. So thinking about location really, really matters. Just to specifically kind of narrow this down so it makes this information digestible, if we think about California, in California, we have two separate systems that are major school systems. We have the UCs, which are universities of California. There's 10 of them. And we have the CSUs, which are California State Universities. And we have 23 of those. That's just in California. So if you're planning on staying in California or coming to California, you already have 33 schools to choose from. And what you could do to start off, which is a really good place to start off if you don't have a dream school, never like grew up with this ideology, is to look at those schools. Look at those 33 separate schools, go on every single school's website and see what programs they have to offer. That's the best way to start. So picking your location and then looking at the schools in that location, right? Starting with states and then going into it. So 33 schools, that seems like a lot. And what on average they'll tell you specifically in the social sciences to apply to about 10 to 12 graduate school programs. So at least you have some variation and you have kind of like a cushioning, right? So you'll kind of rank the schools that you want to go to. You don't have to apply to 10 to 12 schools if you don't find 10 to 12 schools that appeal you and your needs. I didn't. I went through 2 rounds of graduate school applications and I did not. I think I applied to 4 and 4 or 3 and 4 both times that I applied. So you absolutely don't have to take that. That is like the rule of thumb. That is a piece of advice that everyone kind of gives out. So going through the list of schools and thinking about where you would want to spend X period of time is a very important place to start. So if you want to follow along with me, there's a Excel sheet that I created on the Dr. Sarkissyan website. It's a accessible Google Sheets that you can find on the important things tab under a post called grad school, and you can access that, download a copy, and kind of start filling out the sections yourself. I think it's really important to be able to make this information digestible for you because it can be super overwhelming. So I have the sections listed out and you can kind of just fill everything in and everything will be on one sheet and it'll be really digestible and kind of will ease the stress you have about applying. So first thing you'll see on there is the location and the school that you want to apply to and then the program. When you go to a school's website, you'll go to their graduate school page or their graduate programs page, and you can go through the list of programs that they have, whether they're master's programs or PhD, PsyD, or any other type of program. And there you can kind of see like what are you really looking for. Each program is going to give you a different type of type of access to a different career. So some programs might give you access to a lot of research if that's what you're interested in, whereas some programs might give you access to a lot of application based stuff, right? You're in the field, applying knowledge, working with clients and things like that. So you're kind of looking at the difference between the two. When you're looking at, for example, marriage and family therapy programs, which are master's programs, those are more application based. You're working in the field, racking up hours. And at the end of that, you're going to be a licensed marriage and family therapist. If you look at general master's in psychology or a master's in social psychology or forensic psychology or anything like that, that's not going to give you licensure, and you're basically focusing on research and kind of planning to go into a PhD program after that. So these are the things you want to be aware of. Every school's program for the graduate program that they have will tell you this information. So that's where you're going to have access to all that information that you could possibly want to decide whether or not that program is good for you. Those are the first couple things. Then you want to think about the submission deadline. And while that sounds like a very obvious thing, of course you would need to know when the application is due, it's also not as simple as it sounds. Now, I had an application deadline slip up. One of the schools I was applying to said that the application was due at 11:59 on whatever it was, I think December 2nd. And little did I know that they put an East Coast time on their application deadline. So when I went to submit my application at about 10 o'clock West Coast time, it was already late. So I didn't get to submit that application because of the difference between time zones. So while the deadline day is important, the deadline time and the coast in which the deadline time is due is also important. Now, I will caveat this information by saying one more thing. The school I was applying to was a California based school. So you would assume that they would have West Coast time for the West Coast school, but that was not the case. So please be aware of that. That is a thing that happens, and it's more common than you would think. So make sure to write that down as well. That's definitely in the chart, the Google Sheets that I created for you. The other thing I want you to be aware of is the timeline. How long is your program going to take? Generally, each program will tell you that it's a 2-year program, it's a 1-year program, it's a 5-year program, so on and so forth. Everyone works on their own timeline, and it's fine if you finish faster, and it's fine if you take a little longer to finish, but you want to know a general timeline that they have set up for you. PhD programs are generally 5 years, PsyD programs are generally 5 years. Master's programs are generally 2 years, but you want to know how much of your time you're dedicating to each one of these programs. So that's the other thing that you want to think about. So that's the basic information. Where is your school? When is the application due? And what degree are you applying to? Another really important thing that will answer very specific questions about every school is the information session. Now, every single school should have, every single program, I should say, should have an information session. And it's exactly as it sounds. Most of the time, especially after COVID now, they're on Zoom, but you hop onto a Zoom session at the given time, and the school, like program directors, tell you about their program. They tell you all the nitty gritties that you have about their specific program, not like a generalized about all of them. And you get to ask them questions. So if you have questions about financial aid, if you have questions about the application process, if you have questions about really anything, you can ask them in that information session. I think these are important, even if you feel like you have a good grasp on what you're doing and how you're going to do it, like all of the application stuff. It's really important to do an information session because you're just going to feel more comfortable with the school that you're applying to and with your application if you have this first kind of hand experience with the program directors, right? Also, it's always good to get your face and name in there. If you can ask a question, please ask a question. These are people in the program that are going to be seeing your application, that are going to be seeing you when you go to that school. It's really important to start these networking opportunities now to get your name and your face in the door with the program directors. Like that is just an amazing thing to do. So please attend an information session. If you can attend them, you can email them and ask them to Zoom record it for you, or there sometimes have information sessions on Zoom. I'm sorry, on YouTube, so you can watch a YouTube episode of it, type of thing. But they're really, really important. They help you a lot. So definitely make sure to put those information session dates on your Excel sheet and attend an information session. Okay, moving on to requirements for schools. So first thing is GPA requirement. I get this question really often. What's a good GPA? Is there a requirement for GPA? Should I not apply if I don't have the GPA? No. Some schools will tell you it is highly recommended that you have blah GPA. Some schools will tell you we will literally not look at your application if you don't have a 3.5. So it really depends on the school, and on the website or in their information session, you can kind of get the gist of it. If a school says that they have a holistic approach to the application process, that generally means that they're not going to eliminate you if you don't meet their GPA requirement. If they don't necessarily have a holistic approach, that means that if you have a 3.47, but they require a 3.5, that you will be eliminated and they will not look at your application regardless. I'm going to tell you that my piece of advice is that you apply regardless of whether or not you meet the GPA requirement, because you really never know. You really, really never know, and you don't want to weed yourself out of the application process before you've even given yourself a chance to, be admitted. There's also public data sets for all the schools. They should have on their website, or you can ask them in an information session. They should have public information of the past years of students that they've admitted, their average GPAs, their average standardized test scores, how many admitted students they got, how many applicants they got, how many letters they sent out. All of this stuff is public information that you can access. So you can even see kind of where you're at with the averages from the past year's cohort. So that's always a good place to see too. If you see a school's required GPA is 3.5, but their average on acceptance is 3.4, then you know that they've accepted someone that was below the required GPA. So it's a good thing to try to put your application in regardless. So that's another good place to start, right? Gathering as much information about the program you can before you apply. That's very, very good. Then we get into standardized testing. A lot of schools have recently dropped their GRE requirements. I'm talking for the social sciences. I'm pretty sure for med school, they're never going to drop the MCAT, but a lot of schools have dropped the GRE requirements for psychology, for sociology, and things like that. Not all schools. So when you're looking on a school's application or admissions website, they will tell you what standardized testing they require for you to have to submit your application. Most of the time, if you do need to take some sort of test, you will have to do that at least 2 to 3 weeks before your application is due, because it takes 2 to 3 weeks for them to score your test and send your scores out to the schools that you want them to send out to. Standardized testing is also a place where they earn a lot of money. So you're going to have to pay for your standardized testing. You're also going to have to pay for them to send your scores to different schools. So please be aware of that if that is a requirement for the program that you're applying to. It's not always fun. I'll have an episode maybe talking about the GRE and kind of what that experience was like. But just for now, be aware that there are a bunch of different types of standardized tests that you can take for your application process, and you have to kind of just see whether or not the school is requiring that of you. So the next really big thing is your recommenders. Most schools are going to ask you for 3 letters of recommendation, and they're going to say that it is highly recommended that 2 of those letters are from faculty members or educators. When a school says highly recommended, it basically means required. So you're going to want to get 2 letters of recommendation from prior teachers that you've had, prior anyone that's been in an academic field with you. So it could be a research mentor, it could be, I don't know, the librarian, it could be anyone you've had this really intense connection with in an academic field. Your 3rd letter could be from anywhere else, but if you're applying to an academic heavy, research heavy kind of program, it's probably best that you have 3 letters from academic people, if that makes sense. You don't necessarily want to get your boss to give you a letter of recommendation if you're in retail and you're applying to go to a PhD program, because your boss in retail cannot touch on your academic skills. And what you want your letters of recommendation to say is that you're ready to be in this position, you're ready to be a researcher, you're ready to go on this next step, and so on and so forth. So you really want them to talk about your academics, and that's why you kind of want to focus those letters of recommendation from someone who is a teacher, a mentor, a researcher, someone who's in that field with you as well. When you're asking for letters of recommendation, then these are things that have happened to me that I would love to share with you. Please do not send your recommender a request via Instagram. The answer is no. If you message me on Instagram asking me for a letter, the answer is no, because that's unprofessional. If you're asking for a letter, you should ask in person. If you cannot ask in person for whatever reason, you took a gap year, you're not in the state anymore, whatever the case is, then email is the best way to go. Please do not ask your recommenders for a letter of recommendation via any social media app. No Instagram, no Snapchat, nothing. Please don't. Just don't do it, okay? Secondly, don't ask for a letter from someone you don't know. This has happened to me as well. I had a request for a letter of recommendation for someone I had never met before. The answer is no. If I don't know you and I cannot speak on your academic ability, then I cannot write you a letter. I'm sorry. You also want to ask for a strong letter of recommendation, because just asking for a letter of recommendation means that they can give you a generic letter. If you say, hey, Professor Sarkissyan, can I get a strong letter of recommendation? Don't write it like that, but you get my gist. Can I get a strong letter of recommendation? I will be able to see whether or not I can actually give you a strong letter of recommendation. If I can't give you one, which kind of means, did you get like an A++ in my class? Did I see this ability in you? Like, am I able to write and say that you're amazing and talented and, one of one type of thing? If I can't do that, I'll be kind of straightforward with you. And most of your recommenders will. They'll say, like, we can give you a letter. It might not be the strongest, but we can give you a letter. I've also had that happen to me. I had a recommender that I was asking for a recommendation from call me and say, like, hey, I cannot give you the strongest letter of recommendation because I haven't seen X, Y, and Z, but I can give you a letter. So let me know if you still want it. Yes, I did want it. I needed a letter, so I absolutely did want it, but it's good to know kind of where you're standing with that. Technically, you're not allowed to read your letters. So you want to know, at least in like a general sense, like, are you getting a really strong letter? Are you getting like a weakish letter? So you know whether or not to like go to another professor or not. You also want to make sure, please, 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 at least 2 weeks to 1 month notice for letters. I had someone ask me like 3 days in advance for a letter. The answer is no. I have to plan and prep and be ready to write you a letter. It goes through a lot of drafts. Your letters of recommendation are one of the most important parts of your application. It's very, very important that other people are able to speak on your ability, your talent, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you're good in and what you're bad in, right? It's important to the people who are reading your application to know that there are others who have surpassed the level that you want to go into, that are saying that you're able, you're willing, you're ready, you're talented, you're smart. So you want to give us time to be able to write those letters for you. So please, please, please make sure you're giving us at least 2 weeks to a month notice, and ask politely. That's all I got for letters of recommendation for now. Okay, moving on. You want to be able to think about the experiences that are required for a certain program. Some programs don't have any requirements based on experience, whereas some programs require that you have, let's say, 80 hours of clinical experience. Now, while clinical experience, again, talking in the clinical psychology field, sounds like you have to be working as a therapist, it could also be 80 hours of working in something that's a similar field, but not exactly as a therapist, right? It could require that you have 40 hours of volunteer work. It could require that you have research experience. It could require that you have a publication. It could require that you've been to a conference. Every single program is different, and what they require for, or sometimes they won't say require, but what's highly recommended is oftentimes what you need to pay attention to. GPA, standardized testing, letters of recommendation, those are pretty standard across all programs, but these little like tiny requirements are what kind of makes applications stand out to the people who are reading your application, right? They're also not always written in like big bold letters and available for you to see. You kind of have to go digging for it. My first round of applications, I had a school require, I think it was 80 hours of like clinical experience. I didn't have any, but in my personal statement, I said next semester I might have some. Just a tip from me to you, that's never good. They don't want you to say that you will maybe do something in the future, possibly if you admit me. They want you to say, I've done it, I'm ready, I'm good to go. Because that tells them that you have not only been thinking about this in this term that you're applying, but you've been thinking about grad school for a long enough time to know that you've had to rack up those hours of experience, or rack up a conference poster, or rack up a publication. So it's important that you're doing those things prior to the actual application cycle. So make sure to look out for those requirements. Then we have CV and a resume. Now, CV and a resume might sound like they are the same thing, but they are not. A CV, and it's important to know the difference because schools will either ask you for a CV or a resume, and you want to make sure you're turning in the right one. A CV, let's start with a resume. A resume is 1 to 2 pages maximum, where you are like taking advantage of all the space you have in 1 to 2 pages. Don't like extend your resume to a second page if it can all fit on one page. 1 to 2 pages maximum, where you are highlighting the key things that are needed for the specific place that you are applying to. So if you're in a psychology bachelor's and you're thinking about getting your PhD and you're unsure about whether or not to go into a social psychology program, or let's say a clinical psychology program, and both schools have a resume requirement. In your resume, whatever experiences you include can vary for the social psychology program to the clinical psychology program. You want to show the social psychology program on your resume that you're able to do things in the social field. So maybe that includes research and presentations. Whereas in the clinical psychology program, you want to show them that you've had experience with the group that you're going to work with clinical work and things like that. So your experiences will vary on that resume. Your resume is not an exhaustive list of everything you've ever done. Your CV, on the other hand, is an exhaustive list of everything you have ever done. You put your publications on there, volunteer experience, you put job experience, you put your education, you put everything. Everything goes on a CV. It's an exhaustive list of everything you've ever done. And that doesn't change. That's just your life on a piece of paper. And you walk it around with you and you add a little bit of water or coffee in my case, and it turns into a real life human being. That's what your CV is. Your CV is everything, okay? But your resume, on the other hand, is altered or configured to the program that you're applying to or the job that you're applying to, right? Also, just a tip, you don't need to put a picture on your resume if you're applying to grad school. I don't know if that's like a common thing that people are unsure about, but please don't put a picture of yourself on your resume when you're applying to grad school, okay? It's a big, big no. All right. Some schools will also ask you for a cover letter. I hate writing them. So do you, I promise. Cover letters are not fun, but you got to do what you got to do, so just get it done. You know, cover letter is just you telling the school that you want to apply, and it's like a really short version of like a couple lines of your resume, and you're telling them that you're a good fit. It's like a pick me, choose me, love me letter in academia. So that's what a cover letter is. Not all schools will ask for it, but some will, so be aware of that as well. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the difference between a personal statement and a statement of purpose. Some schools will ask you for both. Some schools will ask you for one or the other. A personal statement is as it sounds, personal, you statement. It's about you. It can talk about your struggles. It can talk about, anything that's specific to you. And oftentimes, not oftentimes, I want to say almost always, they will have a prompt for both their personal statement and their statement of purpose. The difference between the personal statement and the statement of purpose is that in the personal statement, you're getting pretty personal. In the statement of purpose, you're not. You're talking about how you're a good fit for the program, what research you've done, what job experiences you've done. What have you done that's good for the program? It's your statement of purpose. This is your big why. Why do you want to come here? Why do you want to be a researcher? Why do you want to be a clinician? Why are you here? Your statement of purpose is literally your big why. Your personal statement can talk about the personal things that have helped you along the way, or like happened to you along the way that have helped you figure that out, kind of. And again, there will be prompts for this. You want to try your best, if schools are asking for both, to not overlap what you're writing in a personal statement and in a statement of purpose. Do not copy paste from your personal statement to your statement of purpose. They're two separate papers, basically, and you want them to be separate. You want them to be different and differentiated when people are reading one and the other. Okay. So I lied. This is the last thing I want to talk about. These are some extras. I call them extras because you can't get everything you want. If you've watched the show Indian Matchmaker, she says you get 60 to 70%. You get 60 to 70% of what you want. Most of the time, you're not going to get every single thing you want on there. So the program could be great, the timeline could be great, the location could be great, all those things could be great, but maybe the campus environment is not so good, right? And you might not know that if you're not visiting the school beforehand, but it's something to keep an eye out for. You want to feel welcomed and loved and safe in the campus environment, physically and like emotionally. And you can't always have that, and you can't always know that. So that's why I called that one an extra. But it is something to be aware of. Also, like the student population, the faculty population, things like that, diversity, and all of those things. Those are a little bit of an extra. You also, on one of the extras, is think about the professors that you want to work with. If you're going into a research heavy school, so a PhD or a master's degree that's research heavy, you're going to be asked to choose a professor that you would want to work with. And generally they're ranked in order 1, 2, and 3. And in your statement of purpose, you would embed that in there. Like, I want to work with Professor Sarkissyan because blah, 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 blah. You don't always get your first choice for faculty members. You also don't always get to pick. Depends on the program. So that's why that's also an extra. Maybe don't put all your focus and time on there. Again, this depends on the program. So that's why I urge you to go to information sessions and get like very specifics about your program. The other one is the financials. Now, while a lot of PhDs are funded, there are also a lot that are not funded. You can have scholarships or financial aid, and all of that varies depending on the school. That's also why I call that one an extra. If you're moving out of your house, you have to get a new apartment, like all of that financial stuff is another thing you have to worry about. But I'd rather you think about what program is going to do the best for you and your career and your job prospects in the rest of your life than think about right now, like, am I going to get financial aid or not? Sometimes things really just work out in your favor. I would not always put my foot forward on the financials and thinking about like how much of a loan I'm going to have to take out, because there are a lot more opportunities than you would know. And you kind of don't know them until you start school. So I'm going to tell you to think about those as extras. And again, you get 60 to 70% of everything you could ask for. So that's the nitty gritty on how you would choose your program. Again, that Excel sheet is accessible for you if you need it on the Dr. Sarkissyan website. Now, I'm going to get into some questions that my students have asked me in the past couple of semesters. First, what makes you stand out during the application process? Be you. I'm not going to tell you to do something that's going to make you stand out, because the thing that makes you stand out is what makes you you. And as cliche as this sounds, there is no other you. No one can be you. So don't try to do the thing that you think they want you to hear. What they want to hear is what you actually sound like. What they want to hear in your personal statement, in your interview, in your application, in your experiences, all that is what makes you you. How are you different? How are you unique? How are you special? Like, all of that stuff shouldn't be formatted in a way to fit something you think they want. Sometimes you don't get into the school that you want to go to, and that's all right, because as much as you're trying to fit yourself to the school also has to fit your needs. So sometimes when you don't get in, it just wasn't the right fit for you. And you shouldn't try to mold yourself into what you think they want you to be, because you're not going to be happy in that way. So always think about what's best for your mental health. You're spending a really long time in grad school. And I promise you, if you're not happy and if you are trying to be something you think they want, you're just going to suffer for like 5 years and it's really not going to be worth it. Okay. Typical class size. Typical class size depends. My program right now has 3 people in our cohort. So our typical class size actually varies depending on which class we're taking. I've had classes with 3 people in it, and I've also had classes with 20 people in it. So it really depends. My program's a little bit different too because I take classes outside of my major, but this is a really great question to bring up to the people who are running the information sessions. In my master's degree, my typical class size was about 15 people, and we would just take classes with our entire cohort. So this is a really good question that varies from school to school. Is taking a gap year a good idea? Yes, absolutely, and no, not at all. Taking a gap year depends on whether or not you think taking a gap year is a good idea. Sometimes taking a gap year can actually do you way more good than it can harm. It can give you the time to figure out your purpose. It can give you the time to get into a research lab. It can give you the time to just de-stress and, prevent a lot of burnout. It can give you the time for having some like actual life experiences before starting grad school. Gap years can be an amazing, amazing thing. But on the flip side, also taking a gap year means you're taking a year off, right? So you want to be really cautious of what you're doing in that year to make your application better. If your goal is to get that degree, then you want to know that in that gap year, you're doing something that's proactive in helping you get that degree. So I took a gap year, highly recommend it. I definitely don't agree that taking a gap year is a bad thing. I think it can be really, really good. I just think you have to be proactive in your gap year. So I had this question, is it better to get a master's degree and then a PhD, or just to get a PhD? It depends. Sometimes you can't just get into a PhD program because you need experiences that a master's program is going to get you. You don't always have to have a master's degree to have these experiences like research, conferences, I don't know, lab experience, things like that. You don't always have to be in a master's degree to get that experience, but a master's degree does help you get that experience. There are a lot of programs, it's rumored that a lot of programs don't love that you come into their PhD program with a master's degree from another school. So just be aware, be really proactive in undergrad. Try to get those experiences in undergrad so you can hop on into a PhD program. You don't have to prolong it for 2 years, and you can kind of get a master's degree while you're getting your PhD. The first 2 years, you'll do like a thesis project, and you can turn that into a master's degree on the path of your PhD program. But I did a master's degree before my PhD, and it was probably the best thing that I ever did. It helped me like refine my research experiences. It helped me get to figure out like what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And it gave me a lot of experience with conferences. It gave me experiences with presenting and with teaching that really helped me prior to PhD. So it could be really, really good. Should someone get their master's degree if they don't feel ready? No, you shouldn't. You should not. But I don't know if you ever really feel ready if you've never experienced it, especially if you don't have anyone in your family that's gotten a graduate school degree or gone to a master's program or done research. I'm not sure if you ever are really like, oh my God, I'm so ready. I'm going to go get this degree. I'm going to be so good, blah, blah, blah. But if you're really unsure about whether or not you want to do that, what can end up happening is you lack motivation. Oftentimes, your lack of motivation will lead to lack of discipline, and you're not going to finish the things that you need to finish to get that degree. And it can actually backfire instead of help you move up. So That's why I tell you it's important to figure out your why. Why are you doing this? Why is this important? How does it help you? What is your purpose? And does that purpose have a role in the master's degree that you want to get into? Journaling is amazing. Meditating is amazing. Do things that are good for your mind and try to really figure out whether or not this is the right path that you should be taking. Okay. Do you recommend working full time and going to school? I basically worked full time. I work a bunch of part time positions, which end up being full time jobs, and I go to school full time. Um, it's definitely not easy. It's absolutely not recommended by your school. Your program is not going to recommend that you work full time. They recommend that you work like the minimum amount. A lot of PhD programs have opportunities for you to work on their campus, so you don't have to work outside of that. But that's kind of not realistic for a lot of people, including myself. So I do have to work outside of the school, outside of my school that I currently go to. Um, I don't know whether or not I recommend it. If you're able to kind of just do school and do the minimal amount of work that you can do, I recommend that you just do school and you do the minimal amount of like work, actual work that you can do. But if you're working, that's if you're doing something that you're working where it's giving you some sort of experience in the field that you want to go into, that's also really good because a lot of people don't rack up those experiences until their fourth or fifth year of PhD or after PhD, which gives you kind of a head start. So, what I'm going to tell you to do is figure out before you start grad school, this is like the best thing you can do for yourself. Figure out what your level of like stress management is. How much stress can you take? How much work can you handle? How much of your time can be busy and you're fine with it? Like, what's that balance look like for you? It's different for everyone. I love to be busy. I'm just like I die for it. I love to like have no time to breathe, right? That's okay for me. That works for me. But I have a lot of people in my life and I've had a lot of people in my life that are literally not able to balance classes and work. And that's fine. If you're one or the other, it's fine. What is important though is that you know which one you are. It doesn't matter if you can only balance classes or if you can balance classes, work, social life, and volunteer opportunities. What matters is that you know where your balance is and where your tipping point is. Because if you go to grad school, you want to know prior to actually entering grad school that, oh, I cannot handle X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to say no to these opportunities. I'm not going to work full time, or I am going to work full time. Know where your balance is so you can apply that in graduate school. It's a much more uh, stressful environment. So you want to know how much more you can add on to that. Okay. I had a question about imposter syndrome, burnout, and time management. Love these questions. I can talk about them for about 6.5 hours. And so, to not do that in this particular episode, I'm going to have a separate episode for imposter syndrome, burnout, and time management. I just want to point out though, imposter syndrome is terrible, but it's also something that's kind of common because you're going into a field that you haven't been in before. You're going into a field that's new that you don't know. And it's okay to feel like an imposter. It's not great, but it's okay to feel it. And honestly, if you just embrace it, it might help. I'll have a separate episode talking about imposter syndrome though, because I love it. I deal with it. It's great. It's fabulous. And we should know more about it. The next question is it highly recommended to apply to a grad school with a cohort? Most grad schools are a cohort program. When you get accepted to a grad school, you get accepted with a group of people. That's your cohort. So you'll take classes with those people. Those people are technically on the same path as you because they got admitted at the same time as you. And it is really good. My grad schools have been cohort, and it's really good because you have people that can help you and are dealing with the same things you are. They're dealing with imposter syndrome. They're dealing with that horrible, terrible professor with that grades really, really harshly, or they're also dealing with this project that they hate and they're struggling through. And you have like a group, like a built in support system. So, yes, I would recommend it. As far as I know, all grad schools work on a cohort basis, but I would definitely recommend that you go to one with a cohort. The next question is, can I change my major after I get my bachelor's degree for grad school? So, what this question is basically asking is, if I get my bachelor's degree in psychology, can I apply to, let's say, a social work program? Can I apply to an education program? Can I apply to a blah, blah, blah program, right? The answer is technically yes. What I am going to tell you to look out for, though, is the specific requirements that the programs have. For example, if you're going to a social work program, a psychology bachelor's degree actually works really well. But if you're going to like an education background, a psychology degree still works well, but there might be some extra classes that they ask you to take. There might be some extra experiences that they ask you to have because you're not coming from the same background. But you most definitely are not limited to apply to just the psychology masters and PhDs if you're getting a bachelor's in psychology. You definitely have options outside of that. Okay, next question is research required? I'm going to say for any PhD program, yes, research is required, or I should say highly recommended, which basically means required. And you can get that anywhere. You can get research experience in your gap year. You can get it in undergrad. You can join a lab. You can take a research heavy course. All of these things, right? But definitely research is required. And it's actually very fun. And the next episode, we're actually going to be talking about what research is and how to like pull it apart, how to join and be a researcher, and if research is right for you. So stay tuned for that one. And the last question that I'll be answering from one of my students is how is the workload different in grad school from undergrad? For me specifically, adjusting to the workload in grad school was extremely, extremely hard. I went to Cal State LA for undergrad and my master's, and that jump from undergrad to grad school was horrendous. And it took me a very long time to adjust to what was expected of me as a student versus what was expected of me as a student in undergrad. There's a lot more reading, there's a lot more editing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting that's involved in grad school. And it's definitely not something we talk about enough. So you're going to be putting a lot more time into your classes than you do in undergrad. A lot of this also depends on like what school you went to undergrad, what program you were in undergrad, and how that workload was. Again, for me, that was a very heavy shift. And in grad school, there was just a lot more work to do. A lot of my time was taken up outside of the classroom, reading these really long articles, books, and things like that, and preparing presentations, and always kind of having to be in the discussion instead of in undergrad, you were just listening. The lecture was provided for you and you just kind of listened and took it in. In grad school, you're an active role player in your learning and in the classes learning. And it's hard to do that flip if you haven't had a lot of experience like that in undergrad. So that's kind of what I would say. And if you can talk to some students who are currently enrolled in the program that you're applying to, that would help you get a real understanding of what that workload looks like. Instead of talking to a program director or a professor, maybe talking to some current students could do you some good. Those are all the questions I had about grad school. I would love to hear some questions. You can leave it in the comments for us. That's going to be all for our Grad School 101 Basics today. Again, that Excel sheet is available for you on the Dr. Sarkissyan website. And please remember to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for our next week's episode all about research.